I'd just like to share this angiogram with you, showing a very important pathology. So we're looking here at a cerebral angiogram. One important point to note is that the internal carotid arteries are not visible on this angiogram. They start around about at these points here. However, the vertebral arteries and the basilar artery are very clearly visible. Furthermore, we can also see some really nicely demonstrated elements of the anterior circulation. We've got the middle cerebral arteries visible here and here, as well as the anterior cerebral arteries demonstrated very nicely looping back over the corpus callosum. Now, the key thing I want to show you on this is the pathology sitting right at the very center of this scan. So if we look here, we can see the basilar artery rising up here, bifurcating into the two posterior cerebral arteries on the left and on the right. And the very obvious thing that we can see is this swelling here sitting right at the tip of the basilar artery. And this is an aneurysm. This is an aneurysm sitting at the tip of the basilar artery. Now, there are a number of reasons why we should be rather concerned about this aneurysm. One thing is that aneurysms within the circle of Willis have a tendency to rupture, and this leads to a subarachnoid hemorrhage and potentially devastating impact upon the patient. And this is a relatively large aneurysm, and so I think we would be concerned that this could rupture and cause problems for this patient. A second concerning feature of this aneurysm is the fact that we have relatively poor collateral supply coming from the anterior circulation via the posterior communicating arteries. So here is the left and right posterior cerebral, and we would normally expect to see the posterior communicating arteries running anteriorly from these, but we don't see them in this case. There are very poorly developed, possibly even absent posterior communicating arteries. And what that might mean is that if this aneurysm developed a thrombus within it, that could occlude the blood supply going to the two posterior cerebral arteries. Now, if the posterior communicating arteries were patent, they would be able to provide extra blood to feed the posterior cerebral territory. However, in this case, thrombus in this artery could completely remove the blood supply to the posterior cerebral arteries territory. The consequences of that would be quite devastating for the patient, actually. They may develop cortical blindness, since both of their occipital lobes would have been deprived of blood, as well as bilateral involvement of the inferior temporal lobes, which could cause a dense amnesia. So this is just a very brief summary of this aneurysm at the tip of the basilar artery and some of its potential clinical consequences. Thanks for listening.